Hi, everybody. Lauren Walker here on our very first edition of Energy Work spin-off podcast, Cool People, Big Ideas. I guess I don't really need to say what that is because it says in the name. I'm going to get to interview incredibly cool people and talk about their fascinating big ideas. I'm super excited for this because I love interviewing people. Wherever I go, whoever I talk with, I'm kind of interviewing them. And it's really fascinating. I love listening to people's stories and pulling out threads of ideas that maybe they hadn't even thought about before. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It is so fun. And for our very first edition of this spin-off podcast, I get to interview one of, I'm going to just say it, one of my heroes. They say don't meet your heroes. And I have had that experience before where I have met people that I've really held in high esteem and kind of been, truthfully disappointed. And so there's really some validity to that phrase, but this is not the case here. Sebastian Junger is one of the most important voices writing in the world today. He's written many books. Most people know A Perfect Storm or The Perfect Storm, which was made into a movie with George Clooney. He's written Tribe, Freedom, A Death in Belmont. He has such a wide-ranging experience. He's spent time embedded in Afghanistan and actually made 2 movies of that time there. One of them was nominated for an Academy Award. He's that level. All of his books have been on the New York Times bestseller list. He is really an incredible writer. But more than that, he is an incredible human being. And the time we got to spend together was just phenomenal. And you're going to get a taste of it here. So I was really nervous before this podcast because Sebastian Junger, and he had just been on The Daily Show and he had just been on Anderson Cooper, and now he's going to be on my show. And I was thinking, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Some of you are seeing I'm covering my hand to my forehead, which is what we do in energy medicine yoga when we have stress, because it keeps the blood in the forebrain. And I was doing that a lot so that I would be able to stay present. So I get, and here's one other really cool piece. I'm interviewing him in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where he lived while he was writing The Perfect Storm. And he is, kind of a national hero in Gloucester because he really, they're already on the map, but he really brought a lot of attention to Gloucester. And so they love him there. So I'm in his, sort of hometown, and I'm going to interview him there after he does this reading for his new book, In My Time of Dying, which is absolutely exquisite. So I get there the night before and I go to the space where we're going to do the podcast and I set everything up, and you can't make this stuff up. A perfect storm rolls into town. I mean, it was a bluebird day, and then all of a sudden the skies open and it is pouring and thunder and lightning and the wind is blowing. I went out to my car. I literally thought the car door was going to blow off when I opened the door. It was crazy. And 4 hours later, it blew back out to sea, and it was a gorgeous evening. And Sebastian did a reading at City Hall in Gloucester that was phenomenal. So all of my nerves were really on full alert. And then I finally met him in person. We've done an interview before over Zoom, but this is the first time I was meeting him in person. And I couldn't have been more thrilled. He is just the coolest dude. He's just cool. He's chill, he's lovely, he's generous, he's open-hearted, and you're going to see all of that on display here because we talked about some really big ideas. I'm super excited for you to join me here in my interview with Sebastian Junger based on his new book, In My Time of Dying. I hope you love it as much as I loved every single moment that we got to spend together talking about really big ideas. Okay, enjoy. Thank you so much, Sebastian Junger, for being here. I'm so excited to talk with you about your new book, and about everything else under the sun.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very nice to finally meet you.
It is. It's really nice to be live together. I got a chance to interview you before on Zoom, but now we've gotten a chance to spend some real time together.
Yep.
And I went to your reading last night in Gloucester, which was absolutely phenomenal. Sold out house. There was, I don't know how many people, a lot of people were there. Packed the rafters.
A few hundred, I think.
Yeah. It was wonderful. How do you feel? You know, the book's been out a few days only now. How do you feel about it?
I'm thrilled with it. You know, it's personally, the book was painful and daunting to write because it's about almost dying. And not only did I almost die, I have memories of what that feels like. And they're upsetting memories. And then I tried to explain what happened, and I went into some very ethereal disciplines like quantum physics, like very, very abstract, mysterious things. And the idea that I would try to understand that and write about it, for me, would just seem like the ultimate intellectual hubris that I could even dare do that. But I did, and then I didn't know if people were what they were going to think, and then they liked it. And I was like, oh, thank God I did it. Like, I made these mysterious things understandable in some way.
So this experience, and I want you to just give us a little bit of the story, but it happened 4 years ago now, and you talk about having, you don't say PTSD, but you had post-trauma from this traumatic experience that you went through. And so now you're having to revisit it in depth on talk shows, in podcasts, in readings. How is that bringing up these emotions again, or do you feel like you're well on the other side of that?
Well, I've always been very good at, I mean, like many people, I think, I've always been very good at being able to abstract things when I need to function. So I can turn extremely upsetting things into an abstraction, function at a high level with that. And then eventually later, the emotional content catches up with you. And I've done that many times in war reporting. And in even some absolutely unimaginable circumstances where, you know, I went into shock almost immediately because of what I was looking at, and then the abstraction saved me. But the problem with that is a few days or a few weeks or a few years later, or whatever, you kind of pay the credit card bill, right? And emotionally, you're like, I don't want to pay for any of this right now. I can't afford to. It's in a crisis. There's, you know, so I'm going to put it on the plastic. And the deal is, I'll pay for it later and I'll pay 30% more, right? It's a good deal. It allows you to function.
Yeah.
Right. And with this crisis that I had a sudden abdominal hemorrhage, and I bled out into my own abdomen, and they barely saved me. And I have some memories from the threshold that we can talk about if you like. But a lot of the emotional processing, it was such a crisis psychologically when I came home from the hospital. There was no credit card to put it on, right? I mean, I had to pay cash up front, you know, and I sort of gradually paid that off. I went to a therapist. I mean, I really did a lot of work on myself because it was, you know, I was in, I don't know, grave danger, but significant danger as a person, and even, you know, my life.
And was that the first time that you really felt that your emotional world was colliding in a way that you could no longer stop it? Like, you've been through some emotional times in your life.
I mean, you know, I've always had defense mechanisms that worked extremely well, maybe too well. They got me through, a bad passage, right? And I think I developed them in childhood, and they not only did they work well, the things I would do to deflect emotional pain ended up being very richly rewarded by society. Like, I can concentrate really well. I can turn a topic into an obsession into a book that then people buy. And I utilized it, I monetized it, I made it useful to other people. Like, it worked, right? With this crisis, it was the first time that didn't work, that I was so inundated, even with combat trauma. Like, very, very quickly, I could sort of regroup and turn it into something that's helpful to people, that's useful to me, that's et cetera, that where I don't feel it, right? I understand it, I don't feel it. And that's the eternal trick. If you can work on understanding something, you don't have to feel it. And then with this, there was no understanding it. It was not possible, right? And I had no choice but to feel it. And the feelings were completely overwhelming. And took, to my surprise, took a few years to actually climb out of. And I'm a committed stoic, I'm not a whiner. I'm utterly disinterested in myself. And even all those, all those wonderful character traits couldn't keep this shit at bay, right? It just came over the flood walls, like, and I had to deal with it.
It's interesting that you say, you know, you can use your intellect to keep the emotions at bay, and you're obviously very physically engaged with your body. I mean, you were a runner, you were in combat situations where you've talked about carrying a 100-pound pack on your back. I mean, you're physically, you box, you're physically active and healthy and strong. And yet you didn't have that mind-body connection that where the emotions are a part of that. It doesn't seem. You kept that at bay too, of like wanting to get information that your body was giving you. So you were physical with your body, but not in tune in a way with your body, would you say?
Well, all of the things that I've done required ignoring pain. You can't run a marathon and be in touch with the pain, right? You get in touch with the pain, you're going to stop, right? Like, I mean, like any sensible animal. Like, I'm exhausted. I don't need to reach the finish line. Right? So to do all boxing, you know, all that stuff, combat, all that stuff involves ignoring fear and pain. Like, to get it out of here, we'll deal with this later, right? So I'm very good at ignoring pain. And which is very adaptive, right? I mean, that's a good trait if you need to function, like just in evolutionary terms. Like that, if you can't ignore pain, you can't function in the natural world, right? When my body started, I now realize, sending me signals that something was wrong. I mean, I had an aneurysm, a ballooning of one little artery, that had been going on for decades, and it wasn't. I'm super healthy, etc. It's not like high cholesterol and hardening of the arteries and heart problems and all that stuff. I had none of that stuff, right? It's just a freak anatomical thing, right? Not really related to anything. And the aneurysm grew and grew and grew, and it reached a sort of critical point where it actually was starting to send out signals, pain signals, like. And I would get this sort of debilitating pain in my abdomen. But I was so used my entire life, 58 years of ignoring pain, I'm like, if I'm not on the floor screaming, it's fine, it'll be fine.
But debilitating, you just used the word debilitating. Debilitating pain, and you were like, I'm going to ignore it.
Well, yeah, I would sit down until it went away, and then I would get up, and because it would go away after half an hour.
Yeah.
But that signal, like, hey buddy, knock, knock, knock. Hey buddy, we need to talk. Knock, knock, knock. Like. No, we don't. I've ignored everything else till now. It's worked quite well. Like, we're not, whatever you're selling, I'm not buying it. Like, I don't need an encyclopedia. Like, whatever. Like, it'll go away. So then finally, one night before I almost died, I just imagined my body. My body is like, what are we going to do with dumbass up there? Like, he's not hearing us. How can we reach him? We need to reach him. And he's just like an idiot. Like, he's not listening. Oh, we'll send him a dream. We'll send him the most terrifying dream ever. We'll send him a dream that he's already dead and he can't reach his family because he's already dead and he's screwed up. That was the dream that I had. I was floating above my family. I was dead because I had not taken care of myself. I mean, the message was so explicit. Like, you screwed up, you didn't take care of business, now you're dead, there's no going back, sorry, you're coming with me. Right? That was the dream. It was absolutely terrifying. So you can imagine my body thinking, surely that will get his attention. Right, like, and I woke up terrified. Whew, thank God that was just a dream, right? Just a dream. Like, that's such a. So I never thought about it before. Just a dream. Like, no, it's a dream. It's not just a dream. It's more real than the reality that you think is happening, right? And thank God it was just a dream. Okay, I'm good. That was weird. And then went on with my day, and then within 36 hours, my dream was happening.
So I want to get to that. I want to talk about that moment and then what happened in the hospital as well, and that as a jumping off point. But you said just a dream, your body was trying to give you information. You've talked before about being able to see everything, combat lines, and I wonder what role intuition plays for you, because that morning, some intuition came to you that said, clear these hedges. It was a dirty, nasty, sweaty job. You were already kind of sick, not feeling great.
Yeah, it's a long dirt road. There weren't hedges. There was a long dirt road that was overgrown, and the fire chief had told me to clear it in case emergency vehicles ever needed to get in. I was like, all right, got it. I'd cleared it like 10 years earlier, and it completely overgrown. And for like years, I was like, I got to clear that again. I have a bunch of chainsaws. I used to be an arborist. I know my way around a chainsaw. Like, I know how to do all that stuff. I just never did it. And so that morning, not because I felt in danger, I was like, well, I should clear the driveway.
So what do you think about that? That morning that
Yeah.
you needed an
Yeah.
emergency vehicle to come down that road. After the death
Yeah.
dream, you had this internal, and you didn't ignore it. A hot sunny day, it was hot out,
Yeah.
it had rained, it was not a fun thing, but you
Well-
followed that intuition. What was that?
I mean, I think it was my body still communicating with me. I mean, I asked a Harvard associated palliative care doctor, like an MD, right? Like a down the line medical professional doctor, about the dream and the sort of like premonition that I had. And I said, what do you make of that? Right? Just as a scientist, I mean, as a doctor, like, what do you make of that? And he was like, oh, the body senses what's going on in all kinds of ways. It compensates for things, blood loss, white blood cells if you have an infection. The body's constantly regulating itself, and it knows what's going on in a mechanistic sense. And it can communicate with the unconscious mind, and it communicates with weird premonitions and dreams and all kinds of stuff. He said you don't have to be like mystical to think that. Like that's absolutely, there's like sort of medical explanations for how that could work, right? Cortisol goes up, whatever. I mean, there's the chemistry experiment that is our human brain and body. Like there's ways to explain that, and that's clearly what happened to you. And so cortisol is basically an anxiety, like when stress levels, when you're faced with something threatening and stressful, cortisol goes up because it sort of like enables your body, enables your body. It's like adrenaline, it sort of like weaponizes you a little bit, but it doesn't feel very good. I mean, it's uncomfortable to feel anxious, but that anxiety is you preparing for something that could hurt you, right? We think of anxiety as a bad thing,
Right.
right? Because it doesn't feel very good, but it actually is part of a fever feels like a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's your body getting the illness out. I mean, dealing with the illness, right? It's cooking the pathogens out of your body, right? So anxiety is not like, it's getting you ready. Right, and I'm sure there's a whole neurochemical signature for anxiety, and maybe my body was cooking that up, and I was sensing it. Like, gotta make sure I'm ready. I don't know ready for what, but I need to.
But there's a difference between that anxiety feeling of preparing for something and a very specific dream, and very specific intuition to clear the path, because otherwise that ambulance could not have gotten to your house, correct?
Oh no, it could have, but it was more. If they'd known someone was dying at the house, they would have run there if they'd had to down the road. Whatever. They were going to get there, but it was more like I sort of realized, oh, I need to make this right. I've been told keep it clear, so keep it clear. And so it was more about my awareness rather than if they could have gotten in or not. But what I would say is that the really awful nightmares are associated with the early onset of autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis and things like that. When you have really ghastly nightmares, there's some association statistically with, it's a sort of early warning sign that your immune system is about to go haywire. Lupus, things like that, are preceded by these really awful nightmares. So there's clearly a sort of like neurochemical and chemical reality in your body that produces nightmares. Right, and so that something like that happened, and I'm not taking away any significance of it, but I think there is an explanation. There is possibly a body explanation for this, and then there's possibly some way more ethereal explanations that have to do with the nature of time and consciousness and quantum physics and all that. Right, but just for starters, the body is incredibly good at staying alive.
Yeah.
And one of the ways it does that seems to be by communicating with the unconscious mind through these sort of neurochemical processes.
And constantly. I mean, in my work, it's all about the body is constantly giving you information.
Yeah.
Do you have access to it?
Right.
Or do you choose to listen and,
Right.
and then make your...
And the problem with choosing to listen, I mean, there's downsides to everything.
Sure.
Right. The upside to not listening is that you can do a lot more stuff while you're not worrying about yourself. Right. The downside to listening, I mean, the upside is that you might catch the cancer early on because like something, the downside is that you can become so pulled into your own circumstances that you actually are too distracted to get anything done because you just like in this solipsistic loop where you just keep constantly reassessing yourself to make sure you're okay. So the upsides and downsides to both strategies.
Well, that's a wide divide. I think there's some middle ground.
Yeah,
which
totally.
Is,
yeah.
you're
yeah.
feeling excruciating pain in your gut. You
Right.
check that out. That's not
Right.
like the,
Well,
there's some middle ground.
Right, and it's like we were having this conversation before, but the sort of the role of the feminine and the masculine in society. A society that is entirely run through quote sort of masculine values is going to have problems, right? A society likewise that's entirely run through feminine values is going to have problems.
Right.
The ideal is to sort of blend them,
Yeah.
right? And that sort of like takes care of most of life's problems. And so I would say individually also.
Right.
Like if you get the right ratio of ignoring and paying attention, if you can sort of figure that out,
Yeah.
like, wow, you're cooking,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's the goal.
That's a sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after this experience, did you find yourself, you had, this was a pancreatic aneurysm, and then they found a spot on your pancreas the following year?
Yeah, so I had the artery that leads to your pancreas, there's 5 little arteries, and one of them developed an aneurysm that ruptured. And it happened abruptly in mid-sentence, suddenly pain in my abdomen, I'm bleeding out.
Let's do that. Let's take us through. Give us the short version, but take us through that.
So I was in a little cabin in the woods with my wife. We had a little bit of babysitting, and it's an old house, and the babysitters were with our young children, and my wife and I were in this little cabin in the woods. There's no cell phone service. The landlines don't work when it rains, and it had just rained, and it's remote. And we were in this cabin, and in mid-sentence, this pain shot through my abdomen. I'm like, wow, what is that? That's crazy. Never felt anything like that. Now, it was too much to ignore, right? It was beyond, it crossed the threshold of like, I was like, oh, it's probably just indigestion, And I stood up to try to, it wouldn't go away. So I stood up to try to work it out, and I almost fell over, and my blood pressure was, I didn't know it, my blood pressure was tanking. I was, actively bleeding in my abdomen. I was losing a pint of blood every 10 or 15 minutes, maybe. There's 10 units of blood in your body. I lived an hour from the hospital. I was basically a human hourglass, and I was dying. I had no idea when I was dying. And I eventually got to the hospital by ambulance, and I'd rebooted a little bit. I'd gone into compensatory shock, which makes you feel a little bit better for a while. I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't even go into the hospital. What a waste of a day. As soon as I got into the hospital, like as soon as we pulled in, I went off a cliff. The doctors knew immediately what was going on. And next thing I know, there's a doctor, a young guy, who has a huge needle, and he says he's going to put it through my neck into my jugular to transfuse me, which I wasn't super psyched about. And so he started working on me. They probe you with an ultrasound probe to get it all lined up, and there's a whole way to do it. And this black pit, this sort of infinite void, opened up underneath me and started pulling me in, just unstoppable. It wasn't negotiable. It wasn't another, like, you're coming with me, right? And I was getting pulled into this sort of, into nothing. I mean, it was this black nothing, and all consuming, and it was pulling me in. It was right down here, and I started to panic. I had no idea I was dying, but I didn't want to. I knew not to go in there. Like, I mean, all of my animal senses were like, do not go near the infinitely deep black pit. And then my dead father appeared above me. He was a physicist. He was an atheist. I'm an atheist. I'm a rationalist. Like, I believe in things I can see and measure and test, like my father did. I'm all those things, right? And there's my father above me in this sort of intense sort of energy form right above me. And it was not like I saw my father. It was way more than that. I saw my father's essence. Like, it was more real than my father. It was like his essence. It was there, like, above me. And he communicated with me, basically, not in so many words, but basically the communication was, it's okay, you don't have to fight it. You can come with me, I'll take care of you. And I was shocked to see him. B, I was horrified at his suggestion. It was grotesque, right? I was like, you're dead. I'm alive. I'm not going with you. I have children. I mean, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that, leave. That's horrible. Like, and I said to the doctor, because I'm still conversant, right? I'm still there. And I said to the doctor, you got to hurry. You're losing me right now. I'm going. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that this train is leaving, and I'm on it, and I don't want to be on it. And then my memory's pretty spotty for a while after that. They eventually it took them about 6 hours. They eventually plugged the leak with a catheter. They embolized they got to the spot that had ruptured. They embolized it with a coil, stopped the blood loss, put 10 units of blood in me, saved my life.
Yeah. And then that was the start.
That was the start.
Yeah.
Right. I thought it was the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the end's always the start.
Yeah. The end's always the start. So I want to dive much more into that, but I want to talk, a year later, 2 years later, they found a spot?
Right. Sorry, I forgot.
No,
yes.
no.
So, I bled out in my abdomen. I lost units and units of blood in my abdomen. There was left a hematoma, like a big internal bruise, basically. And my body gradually reabsorbed all the blood that was, in my abdominal cavity. But there was a last little clump of dead blood and scar tissue and whatever gunky stuff. It's whatever it is, like a little mass in my abdomen next to my pancreas. Pancreatic cancer is a killer. Like if you have a tumor on your pancreas, you're gone. Like bye-bye. Yeah. Right. And I knew that. And the doctor's like, listen, we saw this thing. He said it's called a neoplasm. Like new tissue, which basically shouldn't be there. And but don't worry, it's almost certainly old blood from the bleed. That's right where it would be. But just because you had an abdominal, like a pancreatic artery rupture, doesn't mean you can't also get pancreatic cancer, right? I mean, some people get it. People get cancer, and you might be one of them. And just because that happened doesn't mean that the other can't. And part of me was like, yes, it does. It means I can't. Like, we only get one thing, right? Like, there was the non-rational part of me. I was like, what? But then I realized, like, my father, the physicist, the rationalist, doctors are just like him, right? And so I was like, oh my God, I'm dealing with my father. He's a complete pragmatist, right? And a total realist, thank God. And so he said, we just have to scan it to make sure it's, not a tumor. But the thing is, you can prove you have cancer very, very easily, right? But it's very hard to prove you don't have cancer. And even when they do biopsies, they're like, listen, we stuck a needle into the mass, the neoplasm, but we might have just taken a sample from the part of the neoplasm that doesn't have cancerous cells in it. And so we took 6 biopsies. But when we may have just hit all the spots that didn't have cancerous cells in them, and it's actually a cancerous tumor, but we don't know, we just got unlucky with the biopsy spots. And so you can never be totally sure you don't have cancer, right? So I was, I went through and I was very, very traumatized from the summer before, from almost dying. So I was very vulnerable, super vulnerable to fear. And all my defense mechanisms no longer worked, right? They were just in shambles. Like they didn't work at all. They worked so poorly that, like, if my wife went to the grocery store to get some food and wasn't back, or around when she would be back, said she would be back, I would panic. Right? I had absolutely no ability to say no, she's fine. So with this, part of me knew, like, it's almost like the doctor said, it's almost certainly nothing. But part of me was like, for somebody, it's something. I might be that somebody, and I got to be prepared for the news that I have 3 or 4 months left to live. And I lived in that state of anxiety for like an entire summer. And Barbara, my wife, said, you know that it's almost certainly fine. And you actually have a chance to experience what life looks like from the perspective of someone who's going to be dead in 3 months without having to die in 3 months. Just have a go at it and see what it like. Get something out of this. Yeah. Because you're almost impossible to live with right now. So maybe you can extract some wisdom from this circumstance, right? Not many people usually people that are worried about pancreatic cancer, like, have it, and then all that wisdom that they get, they only can make use of for 3 months. You probably will be able to get to use this for the rest of your life, but you're feeling it as if you are going to die. Mm-hmm. So, and that was great advice, and I tried to do that, and it worked and didn't work. Like, it made reality around me just sort of incandescent. Like, oh my God, it's incredible, right? Almost like a drug trip, right? It was a drug trip, in a sense. But then that incandescence was also sort of paralyzing. And you can't sort of dwell in that, right? I mean, it's a moment of a profound reverence, right? If you don't have any of that in your life, bro, you're missing out, right? But that's all you have in your life. You're like, bro, you got to do the dishes. Like, I mean, come on. I mean, things need to happen, right? Like stuff. Just put down the reverence for a moment, and can we get some shit done, please? So it was like expanding and paralyzing at the same time, right? And I was just incredibly anxious. Just unbelievably anxious about everything, and it was classic post-trauma reaction, or classic trauma reaction. And then eventually the anxiety sort of subsided. And then instead of being fine, I just went into this incredible depression, which I hadn't expected. But then when it happened, I was like, oh, of course, like I know about this, like I've researched this, like, anxiety, depression. It's all the after effects of trauma. And I was really traumatized, in ways that combat never did. And combat was easy. And
because it was a choice.
it was a choice. It was exciting. It was rewarding. It was like all kinds, people admired my work, whatever. There's all kinds of perks for running risks for something that feels at least slightly noble and, whatever. Like, and sometimes journalism can feel slightly noble. So it had a lot going for it. And the trauma, and it was by choice. I was going over there. Like, all right, I'm going to get in the game and then I'm going to leave. And then I'm going to leave the game over there and I go. And so, but this had none of those positives. And it wasn't by choice. Like, it tracked me down. Like, it'll track all of us down eventually. And I just got incredibly depressed. That was when my wife said, you need to get help. Like, I'm worried about you. You're worried about you. You need to talk to somebody.
You chose to start the book with also a potential near-death, seemed pretty near-death experience with the surfing. Seemed like you were pretty close to maybe dying at that point too. Do you remember feeling some of the same things after that experience? Obviously it wasn't as long, you weren't injured. But...
Yeah, I almost drowned. I was surfing in the winter in New England, which, I wasn't a great idea.
Questionable
probably.
Anyway.
Yeah, right. It was a deserted beach. I was by myself. I bought a winter wetsuit. I was like, oh, let's see. The waves were huge, beautiful and huge. And I just got nailed and almost drowned. And it sort of freaked me out. But I was 30 maybe, and I was sort of young and in my don't notice phase of my life, like just block things out so you can do things. And so that almost happened, that happened. And I was like, I just moved on. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to surf in the winter anymore. Well, it was a very simple decision. Like, I just don't surf in the winter, so I just didn't think about it.
So was your relationship with death at that point feeling like, did you feel that some sort of immortality, which a lot of us feel when we're kids or we don't even think about it? You had that experience and then you continued. your whole career start was about working in very dangerous places and doing dangerous things. And so what were you like, well, death, come take me if you want to, or what was your...
Well, I was an arborist. I was a climber for tree companies. And so my relationship with death was that, the most likely way that I would die is in a car accident. I'm a careful driver, or in an accident in a tree. And I was working 80 feet in the air with a chainsaw hanging on a rope, taking trees down in sections, right? And so you're playing with big forces, like forces that will crush you like an ant, And I was like, okay, but I'm fine as long as I don't make a mistake. It's within my control. Driving's not, obviously. You can still get T-boned by a drunk guy at an intersection. But with tree work, it's physics, right? I'm taking off a lot of weight over my head, topping out a tree. Like if you make the cut wrong, the top will come back on you and crush you. So don't make the cut wrong. Make it right. Right? It's like you're not rolling dice here. Like you either did it right or you didn't. And the proof that you did it right is that you're alive. And that's like a pretty cool relationship with death. Right? And
so an unrealistic relationship with death, because you're feeling like you're in control. You felt in control.
Well, in that context, I was in control, right? You're not anywhere else, but in that particular context, I'm hanging on a 5,000-pound test line. The carabiners, everything's like 1,000 times stronger than it needs to be. And if I just don't screw up, it's all fine, because physics is physics, and if you cut it right, it'll fall right, and then you're good. And it gave me a feeling of agency that was sort of intoxicating. And it was way better than not taking risks and not having agency. Right? It's like chess. Like you don't randomly lose at chess because you drew the wrong card. That's poker.
Right.
Right. You lose at chess because you lost at chess because you made worse moves than the other guy.
Right. Interesting. Your subtitle here, How I Came Face to Face with the Idea of an Afterlife. And you spoke about this last night even, that you don't like that word, afterlife, and maybe not even the concept. I don't know if you chose that to be the subtitle, but yes. You certainly, you did. Okay.
Very, very carefully.
Very carefully, and that word.
I looked at every word with a microscope.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay.
And a magnifying glass.
Okay. So then talk about why you chose that word that you don't like and that concept, how you feel about.
At first it was how I came face to face with the afterlife. I was like, no. That's suggesting that there's an afterlife, which no one can say that. No one can assert that, right? But there's definitely an idea of the afterlife. It's a word, and it's a word that comes with an idea, and it's an idea that many people hold in their minds, and they roughly understand what it means. And I definitely came face to face with the idea, right? Do I accept the idea or reject it? And so the book really is very specifically about how I came face to face with the idea of an afterlife, because the idea was unavoidable when I woke up in the ICU and remembered my dead father. I'm like, there's no way around that. I definitely am being confronted with the idea of an afterlife. Was that a neurological phenomenon, just a hallucination? Or is there something we don't understand, some post-death existence that we just don't get, and I bumped into it, right? As many people do when they're dying. We know that because with modern medicine, many people come back from that threshold, and they come back with memories very much like mine, very mysterious, strange memories. So which is it? I don't know, but I definitely came face to face with the idea. Yeah. And so that's why it's named that. And the title, In My Time of Dying, for those of you who were born after, 1980 or whatever, it's a Led Zeppelin song, right? An amazing Led Zeppelin song that was borrowed, taken, stolen from a gospel song from the 1930s, I think. Beautiful, beautiful song. I can't remember who originally wrote it. So that's just to explain what that is.
Nice. I mean, the book is that exploration. You go into quantum physics, about what might have happened. You go into the religious realms of what might have happened. You say all the time that you're an atheist, but you did explore that. And you didn't come to, at least in the book, a conclusion. And so I want to ask you, because then I want to share how the book affected me, because it was very powerful. And but I first want to know, and maybe you don't even want to share this with everybody.
I'm happy to share.
We could edit this part out if you don't.
No, I'm good. There's virtually nothing that I wouldn't share. So
I want to know what you what you think is going to happen to you when you actually do cross that threshold, when it happens, hopefully in many, 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 many decades from now.
If I had an opinion, I would have put it in the book. Of course I would, right? I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
I think so that I can write. I write so that I can think. I'm paid to do both. If I had, for clear and legitimate reasons, come to a conclusion, I would have said it. But it's actually, at least right now, beyond the capability of human knowledge to know for sure. You can propose things, like Christians propose that there's an afterlife. Some mystics propose that there's reincarnation. Lovely. I can't say there isn't, and I'm certainly not going to say that there is, but they're reasonable proposals, some more reasonable than others. I don't know, but what the experience did is open my mind up to the idea that I don't know. The book is basically, how do we talk about what we're talking about? What terms do you want to use? What intellectual constructs, what intellectual disciplines do you want to use to talk about something that actually can't be known for sure?
Right.
So when if you have a murder trial, and there's no direct physical evidence, right? It's a circumstantial case, right? And so what the jury has to do is say, the chances that this guy was at the bus stop and then, the knife ended up at the blah, 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 and none of it proves he did it.
Yeah.
But the odds are so unlikely that all of those things would line up just like that and he not be the murderer. The odds are so tiny, we convict, right? We don't know for sure, right? But it's so unlikely that he's innocent that he's going to prison, right? And
we convict beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. So is there beyond a reasonable doubt an afterlife? No, of course not. Right? Is there beyond a reasonable doubt absolutely nothing? No, of course not.
Right.
Right? And I just want to be really, really careful that we know what we're talking about when we're talking about these things, right? And if you put it in the realm of it helps to feel like there's an afterlife. I'm like, go for it, right? Or it helps to feel like there's nothing. I don't want to be conscious for eternity. Are you freaking kidding, right? Go for it. Yeah, there's nothing, right? You can rest, brother. You're gonna die, and you can rest. You don't have to. You're not gonna have to worry. Your work is done. Yeah, you don't have to worry about it. Don't worry about the afterlife. You won't have to deal with that shit. You can finally rest. So that's on the emotional human level, if any of that helps us lead our lives with more dignity and more courage and more love, et cetera, go for it.
Right.
But if you want to talk in sort of tangible, materialist terms about how the world works and how life works and how death works, if you want to do that, apart from how it might make you feel, if you want to do that, like, then we're going to have to be very, very clear about when we dare assert something, assert that something is true.
Well, there's also just a challenge with what you just said there, if you want to talk in materialist terms, but then you go into quantum physics, which is what came after the mechanistic materialist world that we couldn't explain not anything, but many things that we couldn't explain, many of which you're talking about, some of which you write about.
But it still is materialist, right? I mean, it's just at the subatomic level. There's atoms and there's the components of atoms and photons and all that stuff, and that's the quantum level, and it still is the materialist world. Right.
So then all of it then is, if in that respect, then would be consciousness would be materialist as well.
Well, that's what they don't know. Right. That's exactly what they don't know. Because consciousness, which gravity is a force that affects the entire universe. And without gravity, the universe wouldn't exist. In the form that it exists, there'd be no life, et cetera, et cetera. They have located something called the Higgs boson, which is this fleeting subatomic particle that gives matter mass. It makes things weigh things. Right. So even gravity, which is this invisible force that affects all things and creates the universe, even that has a materialist reality that we do not understand, but we've sort of like, oh, there it is, just for a moment, the Higgs boson, like that's associated with gravity, right? And so is there some materialistic basis for consciousness apart from the neural firings of our brain? But consciousness is different from the neural firings of our brain. Like frogs have neurons, right? But they don't have consciousness. And how do you define consciousness? That's a whole argument. But there is a question, like consciousness, it's just thinking, right? It's just thinking, but it, at the quantum level, affects behavior. It affects the behavior of photons. So is it like gravity, does it have a physical reality we don't understand? Like nobody knows, right? And there's lots of people that have theories, and theories that contradict each other, but no one can assert absolutely, like you can assert that gravity, you can assert lots of things about gravity. Consciousness is sort of still beyond our reach, and it's sort of the ultimate mystery, and it's been proposed that it may be the sort of glue that creates and holds the universe together, like gravity does. Like it's entirely possible.
Right. And consciousness, and not just thinking, but feeling as well, and intuition as well, and tuning in. I want to come back to the book because you talk about after your father died. There were some trippy moments with that. You waking up in the middle of the night and him screaming out for you and finding that happened at the exact same time. So there's like all of these. But then after he died, you slept in his room again because you said if there was any part of him that was still there, you wanted to be present with that.
I didn't want him to be lonely.
You didn't want him to be, even though his body was no longer there.
Yeah.
So what was that for you?
It was me addressing a human emotional need. I mean, if you want me to be like autistic about it, like that's what that was, right? Like, and
your emotional need.
Yeah. And if no one had said to me, "Do you really think that the?" I was like, "No, I'm not saying that that's how things work." But right now, I don't want to have the feeling in me that I've abandoned my father in case there's something I don't understand about the universe and he still needs me, right? So I just don't want that feeling. And so I slept on the couch that I'd pulled into his room in his dying days. I slept on that couch next to the bed that he died in, and I wanted to feel close to him. I mean, there's just this crucial difference between acknowledging and attending to a human emotional reality and asserting a material reality. They're just like completely separate things.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just trying to track, because you say this frequently, I'm an atheist, I'm a rationalist, I want to see what's proven. And then your actions also bleed over into, well, there might still be some part of him, which I would maybe use the word spirit or soul or energy, like what is lingering behind as his body is no longer there, that you're tuned into on some level, that you're speaking to emotionally, but you're tuned into it on some level, and you must be there for it.
Well, what I would say is that a rationalist, and still like to think that I am, a rationalist would say we don't understand how the universe works entirely.
Yeah.
And the universe may include a reality where the dead aren't entirely gone yet.
Right.
Like, not in religious terms, but actually in quantum terms or whatever. Like in measurable, materialistic terms that we just don't have access to, that dad's still there, right? And the rationalists would also say, even if that's not true, human emotions are not always rational. And I'm having a human emotion. So the rational part of me is like, listen, bro, you're feeling something. Like, it doesn't have to make sense. Like, you have to deal with the feeling of this, even if it doesn't make sense. And so, on some level, I knew when my wife's like 15 minutes late coming back from the grocery store, whatever, I knew almost certainly she's fine, right? What it felt like was that she wasn't fine. And I had to deal with that, even though I would never say to the shrink, like, I knew she was dead. Like, I just knew it. That's not what I was feeling, right? I wasn't claiming to know that. I was just having all the experiences, the emotional experiences of the possibility that she was dead. Frankly, it was possible.
Right. And those are the parts that we have to shut out so that we can live. Because I think, than shutting out the moment-to-moment arising of magnificence, I think we can live with that. But, that's what, there's many meditation practices that are about being here now and present moment and all of that. But to have that thought all the time is debilitating.
Yeah, totally paralyzing.
And it's totally true as well. It's a valid thought.
Right, and my very formidable capacity for denial and just sort of psychological defense. What was amazing after the aneurysm rupture was that I no longer, those tricks no longer worked, because what the universe had shown me was like, you know what, you think you're safe, and you're not. At any moment are you safe for sure. Right. So there's a woman, what was her name? Hamilton, up in Canada, in Alberta. So a single woman in her 50s, unmarried, thank God, or the guy would be dead. Woken up in the middle of the night by a large bang, right? 3 a.m, bang, right? Turn on the lights, and there's a meteor, what she said, the size of a large man's fist, on the pillow next to her head. And it had come from billions of miles, for billions of years, and it punched right through her roof and the floor of the ceiling, and hit the pillow next to her head. A few inches over, she'd be dead. Had she been married, the guy would be dead, right? And there it was. And so she got up and made herself a pot of tea. She sat in an armchair and looked at it for the rest of the night. You just don't know when you're safe and when you're not, and you're never completely safe. And that's the illusion that you're like, I'm totally good, I'm fine, nothing could possibly happen. Yes, it could possibly happen. That's the universe we live in.
Yeah, you're never inoculated.
But if you walk around terrified you're going to be hit by a meteor, you can't function like that.
So do you go to the doctor regularly now?
Yeah, I go once a year for a checkup.
You do? Did you do that before this?
Yeah, but it's not detectable.
There's no way they could have known. The pain that started 6 months, that was the only starting indication.
If I call my doctor and say, listen, I'm getting this intermittent searing pain, to the right of my sternum, just under my lower ribs, and it's so bad that I have to sit down sometime, the internist would be like, you know what, let's get that checked out, because that's not normal.
Right.
And then they would have scanned me and be like, holy shit, you have an aneurysm the size of a, grapefruit, or whatever. It wasn't the size of a grapefruit, but apparently it's the size of an olive. Something the size of an olive can kill you in your body.
That's large. I
mean,
have something like that in your body that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, it was just a balloon, but it's just a little ballooning, and that's all it took, right? So they would have seen it probably, and they would have, I would have avoided a lot of drama and radiation burns, because I got radiation burns from being on the fluoroscope while they were treating me.
Are those gone now?
Yeah, they're transient. It's like a really, really intense sunburn. Except it's radiation, and so it makes you think, oh shit, I'm going to get cancer when I'm older.
Right.
But they're not. You don't. Weirdly, I don't know why, but it's not.
So you write a lot about, and you talk a lot about, your father. He was a scientist, and a rationalist, and an atheist, and that's where sort of you follow in that mold. But you don't talk as much about your mother, although you write about her. She's got a few sentences in the book, not a ton. But of course I latched right onto it because your mom was a yogi. and into energy work and things like that, chakras. And so I'm curious, I mean, generally, and especially the time that you grow up, you're raised more by the mother than the father. That's just generally how it was and oftentimes still is. So what was your relationship with your mother in terms of this, in terms of what you were experiencing? Was there anything that you could pull through with that?
So my father was, I think probably would have been diagnosed as Asperger's had he been evaluated. And it was emotionally hard to reach because he was just checked out, right? And thinking very hard about some other stuff, right? And he was a sweet man. I loved him, but he was emotionally was not a resource, right? My mother was not at all like my father, but she was also emotionally hard to reach, right? She was an artist. She was, I think, maybe a little sort of narcissistic in her calling, and had really had trouble being an artist and a mother. And, you know, my sister and I very much felt shortchanged sometimes. So had she been like fully emotionally engaged and, you know, there with the big bear hugs and the, you know, like that stuff that like a lot of people really want to do with their children. You know, she was depraved. She was raised by a depressed Catholic woman in the Midwest in the 30s. Right. She came out of a bad place herself. And she didn't have that. So her sort of mysticism for me had been accompanied by this really hearty emotionality. I think I would have been pulled in, right? But she wasn't that either, right? And so, and her mysticism just seemed sort of arbitrary. Like, so she had a friend who, I mean, a lovely woman, and her husband was a sweetheart, but a friend who was absolutely convinced that she was Queen Nefertiti in a former life and dressed in sort of Egyptian garb. You know, this is Cambridge, Massachusetts in the 70s. It was like some very freaky people in that environment, right? And I'm like, what makes you think, I mean, Queen Nefertiti? Like, and I remember my father sort of grumbling. He said to me, they never think they were peasants in a former life, right? So my mother was like, no, she had dreams, you know, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, that's all like, okay, fine, great, but just don't ask me to believe it in a literal sense, right?
Yeah.
So, and there was something whimsical and lovely about it, but something that was just totally flaky about like, I am whatever I think I am, right? You know, and that subjectivity actually doesn't determine reality, you know, like in that sense, right? And so my mother, she did yoga. She had a connection to her body that was really very healthy, and that like I adopted some of. And she was a macrobiotic and fed us like incredibly well. I mean, like I've been very healthy my whole life, in part because I was raised on brown rice and great vegetables, and you know, no sugar and you know, all that stuff. I mean, like amazing. Nice. And she was an amazing artist, and she, you know, she had a vision. You know, like she had a vision of the world that was different from everyone else's, and she put that vision on canvas. And so at some point, I was a little ambivalent about her art because it kept taking her away from me. And you know, I was 4 years old, and I wanted my mother, and like so, my rival was, you know, paint and canvas, and I didn't appreciate it much, you know. But later, I sort of realized, oh my God, well, how extraordinary to have a mother like that. And I realized, like, if she painted a tree, the painting of the tree was more interesting than the tree. I got to see the tree the way she saw the tree. It was a magic, right? I'm like, oh my God, I would never hang a photograph of that tree on my wall. But I got her paintings all over my house because they're paintings of trees, and it's infinitely interesting. This, you know, like, and there was something about that really, it opened up a sensibility in me that I think I converted into work, you know, my work in words. But that was my mother's good work with me, I think, was opening that up.
Not opening you up to the path of yoga or the intuition or the dream life as being something as equally as real as the...
Well, it seemed too arbitrary, right? She was like, you know, Lois died, and then there was a crow on a branch out the window, and I think it was Lois coming back to say hi. And I'm like, you don't know that. I know it feels good to think that, but you don't know that literally the crow was Lois. Like, I'm sorry, you can't know that, right? Yeah. If it's useful to think that and helpful to you, like, great. Like, but just, again, we're talking about, as long as we're talking about the human experience, I'll go with anything. But if you're making claims on the nature of reality, I'm going to need some freaking proof, right? Like, why that crow and not that crow, right? Like, and so that, that's the humans projecting onto the sort of the walls of the cave, the gods and the myths and the, realities that they need to believe in order to, continue living, on an asteroid that's flinging itself around a solar system for a little while. I mean, I totally get the human need for it. But if you want to know how reality works, like you have to be a little more rigorous in your claims.
And you don't have that need for it. Like, where do you get?
Apparently, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I slept in my dad's, my dad's room. Like, I do have that need. Like, I mean, I'm capable of being superstitious in good ways and bad, right? And but again, that's me trying to navigate the emotional obstacle course of life, not trying to understand reality. Like, when it comes to understanding reality, you really, it's reality. Like, you have to be in if you're going to make claims about measurable reality, you better start doing some measuring, right? And if you're not, then great. Let's just talk about how all this feels.
Right. And there are reams of literature on that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so, it's part of our human makeup, right? So the rationalist is me is like, yeah, humans feel things, like, unfortunately, but they do. Fortunately or unfortunately, they do. They feel things, and they need one of the things they feel is the need to be like meaningful and relevant and quasi-eternal in a completely physical world where they're going to be dead in a few years. And so, like, if they want to think that Lois is a crow right now, yeah, I totally get why you would need to think that. But don't tell me that Lois is literally the crow.
Right.
Right? That to me, there's like a huge difference. And my father, of course, was like, understood that difference very well. And I really related to him and him sort of like sorting out, like, wait a minute, what are you saying here? Like, that doesn't make sense.
But he did say something about the souls all go back to the ocean at the end, I think, I'm not sure, which is right out of the Vedas.
Right. So he, and like Schrodinger and some others who pioneered quantum physics, he said, look, the soul, like, a terrible word for it, Christian connotations, like, forgive me he was like, forgive me the word, but whatever you want to call it, the non-physical identity of a person is like a wave in the ocean. So he was his specialty in physics was acoustics. And acoustics is pressure waves traveling through a medium, right? And sound waves are pressure waves traveling through air or water or whatever it is. The waves and surface waves are pressure waves traveling across a pressure differential, which is water and air, right? So he's like, we're waves. We're like pressure differentials on a discontinuity traveling across the surface of reality. And eventually that energy diminishes and diminishes the further you go, and eventually dissipates. And then there's no more wave. And you return to the water that you were made of, right? But that energy, the entropy gradually takes over the energy that you are, and eventually you are gone. But what you were made of remains. And our soul, like our bodies return to the earth, our soul returns to the sort of soul matter of the universe. And so, he was saying that to comfort himself in human terms about mortality, but also with an eye towards the physics of it. Like this, in terms of what we know about the second law of thermodynamics and entropy and all that, it all sort of made sort of sense to him in those sort of entropic terms. And so that was it. So is that mystical? I don't know. Like, it depends what you mean by mystical. And as we've talked about, mystical might just be the word we use for physics we don't understand.
Right.
So that's where he was at with that.
Right. That's so fascinating. I want to just share with you how I felt after I read your book, and I wrote you right away. I was like breathless, right? And then I read it again because I had to now read it. The first time I read it as your friend, like, oh my God, why didn't you go to the doctor? 6 months, how could you do this? I was mad at you, you could have died, that kind of thing. Which I think, this is the most personal book you've ever written, the most intimate. It's very intimate. We go inside your body, right? Like that, it's deeply intimate and terrifying. And I think you probably will have that response from a lot of readers of like angry at you for not listening to the signals and that you almost died. That was a gut response that I had. And then I reread it. And I want to talk about the writing of it in a moment, but I want to talk about my takeaway from it. which, I mean, it might be a spoiler, but I felt a little confirmation bias, maybe. I felt, oh, good, there is the afterlife. That's what it confirmed for me. All
Right.
of those stories, all of those, what
Right.
I call anecdotal evidence or whatever. But to me, it was clear that there is something that continues after. And my own father died of a brain aneurysm, very young. He was 49 years old. We were very young. The thought that, does it give me balm and succor? Yes. Is it true? I don't know. But from reading your book, I feel like it's more likely that it is true than that it isn't true. So if I had to convict or not convict based on the circumstantial evidence of your book, I would say could I say without a reasonable doubt? I would say that there is an afterlife, or that there is some continuation of consciousness.
There's
And I
another.
felt
le-
great.
There's
That
another.
made me very happy.
There's another wonderful legal standard, which is what they use with grand juries, which is more probable than not.
Okay, perfect. Grand jury, I like that better. More probable than not. I would absolutely lean in that direction.
I mean, I might get there with you, but what I would say is that when some people say the problem is the word afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, the associations are, so you're just sort of in this sort of like divine hammock, swinging
Right.
around above the clouds,
Right.
and there's all your ex-girlfriends, and there's your grandmother, and
I
then
don't
there's this-
want that.
Right.
Actually, I'm
Yeah.
going to say if we have a choice.
Right. But everything's lovely, and
Yeah.
you know, whatever. It's sort of some version of this, except you're in a health spa in the
Right,
sky. You
right.
know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
whatever. Like
Yeah, it is some view, yeah.
and that does not seem even remotely likely.
I would agree.
Right.
Yeah.
But that there is, I think for me, the most plausible, maybe even more probable than not understanding of it is that we don't understand how consciousness works. We don't understand how it works in the individual or outside the individual. For example, our observation of quantum phenomena changes the quantum phenomena. It's like basic misunderstanding. We just don't know how that works. How can it be? And one of the proposals, and this comes from some very heavy-duty eggheads like Schrödinger, is that there is actually a universal consciousness that suffuses the entire universe, which is now, last time I checked, 93 billion light years across, right? Of course, a light year is the distance that light travels in a year. So 93 billion light years across, and then all of it is this sort of colossus of consciousness that we're a little pinprick part of. And that when we die, we are reabsorbed, like my father said, we are reabsorbed into that colossus, probably without a conscious identity. So it's not like, oh my God, here I am, Sebastian, and I'm part of the big guy now, right? Like, you don't have an I to think about, so. But there actually is some kind of continuity in some sense where so death isn't a ultimate ending, but it's the ultimate expansion. And I can kind of get with that, but that's not what most people mean by an afterlife. They're picturing something like a nice vacation in the Caribbean, right? I mean, that's like their vision of it.
And that consciousness, let's get back to that for a moment, that you're talking about is something, I mean, we were talking last night about Joseph Campbell. He very much leans into that. Jung, the collective consciousness. And if that is all true, some of those pieces of information that you were able to extract from that, of your own personal nature, would be available. Like, information is in the field, and you tuned into that information, and you didn't do anything with that information, but you tuned in and you got that information.
Right.
Right. So I think that is, I think that's a real, I mean, I that's all the work that I do.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I definitely subscribe to that. Your kids were very young when this happened, maybe 3 months and 4 years or something?
3 years old and 6 months old.
3 years old.
Two little girls.
Two little girls. They're a little bit older now, but still quite young. Do you talk to them about death? And if so, how?
Yeah, they bring it up because, the word is bubbling up in people's, they're 7 and 4, and it's sort of bubbling up in among their peers. Grandparents are dying, whatever, how pets are dying, like it happens. And so they've asked me about it, and they also know, the older girl knows, she can read, she knows the title of my book, she has some memories about when this happened.
She does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she knows that something very scary happened to Daddy, and she doesn't want to know too much about it, but she just knows something. So, something happened in the adult world, and And I think there've been a couple of questions about death, maybe, like, what happens when you die? And I just, like, shameless evasions on my part. I'm like, we don't know, but the point is, we do know that we get life. No one knows what happens after you die, but we do know what happens while you're alive. And the point of being alive, one of the points of being alive, is to love fully and well, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, like, and that's how Daddy feels about you, right? I mean, I love you more than anything ever. I didn't even know this feeling was possible till you came along, right? And I asked when my youngest daughter was 2, I was sort of playing with her, and she was being very cute. And I was like, honey, do you know how much Daddy loves you? And she sort of ignored me, and I was like, I asked her, I said, do you realize how much Daddy loves you? I was sort of being a little jokey about it. She ignored me. And then finally I said, do you know what love means? And she looked at me and she said, yes, Daddy. Love means stay here. It's like, wow, you really got to the core of that, didn't you? In a hurry, right? So, that's the level I'm at with them about death. Yeah. Like, death, whatever. Yeah. Stay here. I'm here now.
Stay here.
Like, that's what you get is I'm here now. You're here now. Yeah. Like, that's all you're ever going to get.
My his father died at 39 years old. My dad was 7. So he essentially didn't grow up with a dad. Jeez. And he was one of 3 brothers. They all thought they were going to die at 39. His whole life, he said all the time, I'm going to die at 39. He would write us letters every year on our birthdays, or on his birthday, excuse me. Yeah. Dear Lauren, I love you so much. This is whatever, because every year he thought he would die. And he didn't die at 39, but he died at 49. Yeah. And, like, again, that premonition. Could he have done it? I mean, I don't know what he could have done. Would they have found a brain aneurysm, a brain scan? I know that fixing a brain aneurysm is incredibly dangerous anyway. So, but it's that same, like,
But it is fixable. I mean, had they known, they might
have been able to.
Yeah, but who goes in and gets a head MRI, right? Unless you absolutely have to.
Crazy headaches all the time for his whole life.
Did he?
Yeah, he ate a bottle of Tylenol once a week.
But his doctor didn't say he maybe wanted to get you checked out?
Did he have a doctor? Because he didn't have a wife. He didn't have a wife.
There you go.
So he didn't go to the doctor, which is...
There you have it.
There you have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. But he had that same knowing.
Yeah. My entire adult life, I had this awful feeling, which is weird because I'm super healthy. I don't, like all the sort of things that make middle-aged men drop dead. I just don't have them, right? I have a great, strong heart, low blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. And I had this knowledge that I was going to die in my 50s, right? But my aneurysm was growing for decades. Yeah. And on some level, did my body register that?
Yes, it
and
did.
Communicate it to my unconscious mind? Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally buy that. Wow. I mean, it doesn't mean there's a God, but I totally buy that things work that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, so I'm going to be very vague with the details because I was told this in confidence by someone who. So I know someone that was at World Trade Center the day before 9/11 and had a horrific vision. And the next morning it was 9/11. A vision that just completely, I mean, the horror of it just paralyzed her. And the next day it happened. Wow. Right, so that's not the body communicating with the brain, right? I mean, that's not an aneurysm.
That's the field.
That's the big one, right? I mean, but most people didn't have that. So maybe out of, like 380 million people in the United States, what are the odds that someone's going to have that vision the day before 9/11? Yeah, they're pretty high, right? You could go the statistical model on this and be like, okay, I'm not impressed, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't something there that's happening and that she was tapped into it, and which means that not that she could see the future, but, the day before, those young men who perpetrated that horror were in a hotel in Portland, Maine, planning it. Right. And if there's communication between humans in some way that we don't understand, they knew that was going to happen. Right. which means that that knowledge was available to everybody, maybe. You know, so there's still maybe a mechanistic explanation that we just don't get.
Yeah.
Right.
Donna Eden, my teacher, and I've connected you with her to speak with her as
Yeah.
well. She had that same, not that vision, but she knew something was going to happen. And her daughter was actually in the Middle East performing. And she called her, it might have been 2 days, or maybe it was 2 days before 9/11. And she called her and like, you have to come home right now from the Middle East. And she didn't want to come home. And Donna called her, the boss at her work, and they love mothers, like they listen to mothers, right? That's like a big thing.
Right.
And she was like, send my daughter home. And her daughter was furious, like, how dare you call my boss and send me home.
Wow.
And then she got home, and then it happened the next day. So it's...
Salman Rushdie, a few days prior to his terrible attack, knife attack, stabbed, 2 dozen times. I didn't read his book, but apparently he had a vision of that happening 2 days prior.
Wow.
He completely dismisses it. Right. He was like, yeah, it's just coincidence.
Even now, he still dismisses it.
Yeah.
That it was just
It's
coincidence.
it's in his book. I haven't read his book.
Do you had your dream, and you had the intuition to clear the drive. Do you dismiss that, or do you think that's connected?
I mean, I think there's modes of communication we don't understand between the body and the unconscious mind, between human minds. Like the guy who was planning on killing Salman Rushdie was thinking about it 2 days prior.
Right.
And is it conceivable that like he could pick up on that frequency and like, yeah, I can imagine that the universe works that way in like material terms.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so are those all coincidences and they don't add up to anything? I don't think so. I think it actually reveals something about the nature of reality. Right. I don't think it's just 300 million people, someone's going to think of 9/11 beforehand.
Right.
I don't quite buy that.
Yeah. And I don't think God or religion, I mean, I know that that's a huge part of Afterlife and all that, but I don't think that even really, and you talk about this, needs to come into the discussion. Like, I think we can have the conversation without that. I want to talk a little bit about the text itself, because the story is so compelling that everyone's been talking about the story.
Yeah.
But the writing, can we just for a moment talk about the writing?
You're singing my song.
Because it's absolutely exquisite. It's absolutely beautiful. It's
Thank you.
revelatory. It's absolutely exquisite. And so I just want to pause for a moment to just acknowledge that.
You're very sweet. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. I mean, I work really hard on it, and I get slightly hurt when no one notices my hard work, right? And like, I prepared this beautiful dinner for you guys, and you just wolfed it down and left. You never said, right?
Yeah.
How nice it was. I could feel a little hurt. Is there a hurt cook or something?
Yeah.
And so when someone notices it, I'm like, oh, I like all that hard work. It does get noticed. Like that's for me as a writer. That's the payoff, is someone like you saying what you just said.
Yeah, good. I'm glad, because I want you to take that in, because it's so beautifully written. I mean, all your work, but this particular, and I wrote in, when I wrote my review of it, it was like the glazier holding up the goblet to the light, how you are like looking at these very difficult issues in such a exquisite way. You've been compared to Hemingway. Since you started your career, obviously there are obvious parallels. A war correspondent, he tried to be a war correspondent, drove the ambulance.
Right.
Spain, you spent a lot of time over in Spain. The boxing, just a lot of the themes are very masculine. He wrote about very masculine items or things as well. I think you have a lot more yin in your writing than he did. I think you have a lot more access to that than he did. But I also see those parallels. And he was my favorite writer growing up. So I've read absolutely everything that he's written, all the posthumous books and all of that too. I know that you felt a little like, you can't, like, I take that on, like, you're like Hemingway. I get that, and the humility, and I appreciate that. And I know that he was a favorite writer of yours. How did his writing affect yours, his career? Did you was he sort of any kind of a guiding light for you in terms of choosing how you were going to write?
I mean, he was one of the guiding lights. I mean, he was like an example of just almost perfect prose. I didn't want to write exactly like him, but I wanted to have the same respect for language, the same efficiency, the same exquisite sort of like attention to detail, the same sort of brilliant clarity, and the same just sort of solidness. It's so the prose are so solid, like unmovable, right? And simple declarative sentences, and there's no guesswork about like what's he saying, like. And then, along comes Joan Didion. I'm like, holy shit, that's some writing right there. So then there's an essay in The Atlantic, or Harper's, I think, where Joan Didion writes 5,000 words discussing the opening paragraph of, oh God, I forgot the name of not For Whom the Bell Tolls, the other famous Hemingway novel from World War I. Please help me.
Not Sun Also Rises, For Whom
The Sun Also Rises. Yeah. The opening paragraph of The Sun Also Rises, as discussed by Joan Didion, for 5,000 words. So you've got this like exquisite prose, discussing exquisite prose. And if you're like a writer nerd like me, I'm like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. Like, there is an afterlife.
There it is.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And she talks about like where he put one comma in one sentence, and it just like completely makes the entire scene, and it's one comma, and you're like, I'm not even a freaking writer. I mean, this is right. So that's what those people were for me. Peter Matheson was another one. Cormac McCarthy, they came galloping in at the end on a horse. Like, oh shit, that's possible too. Yeah. Oh my God, like I'm never gonna get there. Like this is. So there are those bright lights, incredible lights that I've learned from. And tried to learn from and not just crassly emulate. It's such a fine line.
Yeah, it is. I think you've done it though. I think you've done it. It's not imitative at all. It is very much your own voice. And I think Hemingway, if you're looking down from your hammock with all your ex-girlfriends and ex-wives, would be very proud that you're continuing his lineage, his tradition.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to read a few things from the book, and I want you to illuminate them as well. I have so many notes here. This is like, I just want you to explain this. It's an open question whether a full and unaverted look at death crushes the human psyche or liberates it. One could say it's the small ambitions of life that shred our souls, and that if we're lucky enough to glimpse the gargoyles of our final... I don't have the next page. That's not my question. My question is this.
Final descent.
The final descent. What are the small ambitions of life that shred our souls? What do you mean by that?
Just the unseemly scramble that we're all engaged in. My sister didn't write me back when I emailed her about the dinner, and I got passed over for a promotion, and Brenda was mean to me, and whatever, like all that stuff, which is so human and so understandable, but it's like, boy, does it drag you out of the miracle of the present moment and just shove you into the sort of latrine of human existence. Like, it's the opposite of a death awareness. I mean, a death awareness is life awareness. They're the same thing, right? And when you're not close to a death awareness, you're not close to life, and you're not living. And so those things, the soul shredding stuff, takes us away from both of those sort of twined truths. But then there's the possibility that unprotected, unfiltered look at existence and death is so overwhelming that the human psyche can't really take it.
Which you experienced.
Which is exactly what I experienced, and other people have. Right. So it's an open question, like, what is it that destroys the human psyche? Right. Is it your just bottomless anger at Brenda, or is it, a full look at mortality and existence, and no one knows which which is worse.
Right.
I'd say Brenda's worse.
Brenda might be worse. I was never able to explain the dreams I had about my father. but maybe I didn't need to. Maybe they're just the kind of coincidence that people love to find meaning in.
As a species, we're meaning seekers. So hunting, you look for patterns in animal behavior.
Yeah.
Warfare, you're definitely looking for patterns in the enemy, because once you know the pattern, you can kill them. You're looking for patterns in your wife's mood, right? Or whatever. I mean, in your children, everything. I mean, you're looking for patterns in everything. And those patterns are meaning. They have meaning, right? And so we're constantly looking for meaning. And, meaning is the one thing we don't have proof of. I mean, we know the universe exists because we're in it. We're conscious, so we know that we exist because we're conscious. We're thinking, we're like, there's a self-proving loop, right? But we don't know if any of this has any meaning whatsoever, right? And so we're constantly looking for patterns that that demonstrate meaning, right? Yeah. And maybe I was just doing that with those dreams. Or they're a little portal to, wow, the universe works in ways we don't understand yet, and there's information flying around that your cognitive brain is just too cluttered with its busy tasks to be receptive to. But if we can just put you asleep, if we can just get you to close the shop and go to sleep, then you're open to it. Yeah. For a long time, I had I had a moderate amount of trauma from combat and from some other things. And, it never affected me, because I would just think of as something affects you when you're awake. But I never thought about it. I mean, I just like, the sea walls were strong. They kept the sea outside the city, right? Like, nope, I'm not getting in. These are good, like. But what happened was I couldn't control my thoughts when I'm asleep. So the trauma started coming out. It had to come out somehow, right? And it came out when I was asleep in the form of dreams, what I called crying dreams. And I would sob in my sleep. So basically, like, my little outpost would get overrun because the sentries were asleep. They dozed off, and we got overrun. My feelings would overrun me, right? Because I wasn't, keeping all that stuff at bay. So that was my vulnerability, and my salvation was that I would, when I was asleep, I would have these just dreams that were racked with grief. And I would wake up, I'd be crying my dream, and indeed when I was awake, I was, my face would be covered in tears. And I would say to my wife, like, I'm having, I had another crying dream. And she's like, oh, honey, what's going on? What are you so upset about? I don't know, it's crazy. I've nothing to do with it, right? But eventually it got through, right? Yeah. And so I started processing that stuff in my sleep because I just would not allow it in my waking life. And then eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to grab a shovel and start digging. Like, I'm going to there's a broken pipe down here somewhere. I'm going to find it and fix it, right? Which was one of the great turning points in my life when I did that. I mean, it really, my whole life was leading towards the choice to do that, and then the ability to do it.
Yeah, that emotional component to our lives. I mean, I would say one of the most, if not the most important part of what makes us human. It's what drives every decision and choice we make in our lives is emotionally driven. Yeah. And having access to your emotions, but not being overrun by them. And they're going to come out. Yeah. There's no way they're not going to come out. They're going to come out in some way. If you suppress them, they're going to come out in some disease pattern, or they're going to come out in your tears in the middle of the night. Like, they will make themselves known to you some way or another. And that's the work I do. Right. And you talked about going to not a yoga retreat, but a retreat where you did yoga. And
nightmare.
Yeah, can you talk about that?
I'd never done yoga, and it was a veterans retreat in the western Montana, and beautiful spot. And most of them were like real deal combat veterans. There's a lot of different kinds of veterans, right? And most people in uniform actually weren't in combat, but these were most of them were like real deal combat guys with and a few women as well who with real trauma, like the real thing, right? And we would do. They made us do yoga every morning, and I was amazed. Like as soon as I started, you were outside under the pine trees, and the young woman was leading us through the moves, whatever, and all of us were just like stiff as. There's nothing like a lieutenant colonel for like stiff hamstrings, right? All of us were just like, ah. And I just felt this immediately, this almost unstoppable desire to just start sobbing. And it just released, and so I didn't cry. I spent a huge amount of energy not crying. But, like, wow, what is that? Right. So then, after 4 days of this, I said to the woman, like, I was like, don't tell the other guys, but like, I kept wanting to cry. It's like, that happens a lot. Don't worry. Like, you're still a man. You're still like, you're good. Like, your secret's safe with me, but that's really common. I was like, oh, thank God. Right. And, so then we had a sort of ceremony in the last night, very moving ceremony for people we'd lost. And each one of us had, we wrote a name on a sandbag, someone we'd lost. Didn't have to be in combat. Filled the sandbag full of sand and placed it, they sort of built a sort of ring of sandbags around the fire pit. And they started, and, simple ceremony, and all of a sudden these guys, it was sort of extraordinary. Like 24 men, a few women, everyone's crying, everybody. And they fought. There's no group of soldiers fought for an outpost harder than those guys fought to not cry in that situation. And they lost. Thank God they lost, right? And it was an extremely emotional, amazing experience, right? And then, of course, what was followed, the energy rerouted itself into like the most hilarious, giddiest, funniest conversation I've ever been part of. It just rechanneled, after a respectful, passage through grief, it rechanneled into just like this incredibly funny conversation. And, everyone was crying from laughter, right? And then we all went to sleep. And that it released some shit, right? So that in the middle of the night, I had a terrible nightmare and I was screaming in my sleep, and it sort of woke me up, and I'm in a barracks full of like 20 guys, where I was like, oh shit, I hope I didn't wake anyone else up, and I hope no one could tell it was me, right? And the snoring going on in there, and the sounds coming out of those men. I had forgotten what men are like when they're asleep, but it's just middle-aged men, particularly, like, good Lord, like. But I'd woken up screaming from this nightmare, and it was a nightmare where my family was getting attacked, and I couldn't protect them. I was trying to protect them, and I knew I was going to lose this fight. It was, and I was screaming, right? So then in the morning, someone said, "Hey, did you hear any screaming last night?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't think anyone knows it was me." And so the guy said, "Yeah, I heard some screaming." And the first guy said, "Yeah, there was actually two people screaming. One guy started screaming, and then another guy started screaming in response." Like I triggered his screaming, right? And I was like, all right, that's what happens when you get a bunch of guys with PTSD. You have them do a ritual, and then they sleep in the same space. Like he said, yeah, it was kind of a call and response. That's what happens when you don't deal with your emotional reality.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's everything.
Yeah.
Your biology follows your emotionality.
Yeah.
You change your biology with your emotions for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope you do more of that. And I know you do lead things with veterans to give them space to be able to emote and be human and all of those things that they can't do, as you talked about, that they can't do when they're in the field.
Yeah, and what I realized, if you understand my background with my mother and all that, the yoga and the Queen Nefertiti, et cetera, like the mind-body connection, I've always been like very, very skeptical of, because it was that idea was put to such sort of like flaky uses, frankly, in the 70s when I was a kid with the people that are around me. You know, very unrigorous thinking, basically, just very sloppy. Like, so I've always been very skeptical of it. And then, you know, I started to experience how that worked. And so one of the things, so there's something called somatic experiencing. So when I talked to a therapist after my medical trauma about my psychological struggles, she said, look, clear trauma, we can talk about it. I know how this works. We can talk our way through it. But it actually might help to do this thing called somatic experiencing. Part of me was like, oh boy. And she said, nah, this woman's really good. Just give it a try. I was like, all right. Like, it's only $300, you know, so $250 a session, something like that. It's, you know, not covered by, you know,
No.
Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? And so I went, all right. So I went up. I went to see this woman, and we talked for a little bit. And she was just an extremely ordinary middle-aged lady, and I was like, "What? This isn't going to work. Like, she's going to put her hands on me, and that's going to like change something." And so I laid out on the table, and she said, "I'm just going to put my hand under the small of your back, near the area of your spleen and your kidney, and just let me know if you're comfortable with it." And so, you know, and she put her hand there, and like within 30 seconds, I was just sobbing. And I was having all these completely unbidden, unexpected memories from combat and from all this stuff. It was like it's just some ghastly newsreel was running through my head. And I was and a deluge of tears. So to the extent that men cry, they never cry like lying flat on their back, right? That's not the crying. If you're going to cry as a dude, that's not the crying position, right? You're like on the edge of the bed with your like this, with your elbows on your knees, ready for whatever's coming, and like, all right, I'm crying now, and then that's going to end, and I'll go get up and do something else, right? But you're not flat on the bed, prone. And what men don't know, what I didn't know, is if you cry really hard with flat on your back, your ears fill with tears, right? The tears run right down here and just fill up your ears, and you have two little swimming pools in your ears, and you can't hear anything. I was like, who knew? And this went on for like 6 straight sessions. I would see her every 2 weeks, and for 6 sessions, I just sobbed. No idea why. I mean, no, we didn't even talk about it. I mean, there wasn't like, what were you thinking? It just was a complete body response. Mm-hmm. And then like on the 6th or 7th, like on the last, what turned out to be the last session, I got there and I was like feeling a little different. And I lay down, nothing, totally empty. And she was like, you've emptied yourself. And we can keep doing this if you want. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of work, you know, we can always do work, but something clearly changed. And I was like, yeah, something changed. My understanding of reality changed, first of all. No, but it was very extra. It was really therapeutic, right? And it was a body, you know, it was body work, right? And my father, I'm like stuck in my brain. Words work, you know, concepts work. You think your way to the solution, you know, all that stuff. It's all true. I mean, airplanes fly because people thought through the problems, not because they have faith in something, right? Is they thought through the problem. But then there's this reality, the body reality, which is just totally mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait to see your book on that. We're going to talk for that one. Okay, I just have to read this because to me this is like, I think this is the whole crux of life I wrote here. And yes, double star, exclamation point. Every day I cycled from an almost drugged state of appreciation to panic and back again. Barbara, your wife, said she couldn't take much more of me like this and made the excellent point that I had an opportunity to experience the insights of terminal illness without almost certainly having to pay the price. What was I learning? What could I come away with from this with? My father had continued reading history books until the last weeks of his life. Would I keep practicing music if the news were bad? Reading? Running? What would be the point? But then, what's the point anyway? I mean, I wrestle with that at least once a week. Like, there's no reason why we're here. There's no reason to do anything. Nobody except you and maybe your wife. Maybe you're a little different. But for most people, nobody cares what you do. Right. Nobody cares if you do anything or nothing at all. And it really is, if the ultimate proof of God is existence itself, which many claim to be the case, then a true state of grace may mean dwelling so fully and completely in her, thank you, in her present moment, that you are still reading your books and singing your songs when the guards come for you at dawn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you live like that now?
I don't know what I would do if I was told I was going to die of cancer in 30 days. I really don't know. But I do live like that. Now I have the space of not knowing when I'm going to die. And in that, I fill that space with things that feel meaningful. And I try to focus on their meaning as they're happening. Right. And on the experience of it in the moment, I try to remind myself not to forget to have the experience while it's happening. And, you know, if I can make my pitch for my little, like, most recent obsession and public service announcement, is that, you know, more or less that means not being on your stupid phones. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's just, sorry, like, that is not the present, that's not you in the present moment. That's you somewhere completely else. And that's you somewhere false, right? It's not real. These are pixels on a screen. In a literal sense, you are actually not talking to your friend. You're talking to pixels. Right, your friend is over there. If you want to talk to your friend, you're might have to get on the crosstown bus and go see him. Right, but these are pixels, right? And so, and that's not even just social media and all that garbage, right? So, you know, if you really, you know, it's for me. I don't have a smartphone. I have a flip phone, and for a very, very specific reason. And I know a lot of people have jobs, et cetera, that they need that, blah blah blah, and you can do that. But the rabbit hole of social media and obsessive scrolling and posting and all this stuff that's completely self-referential, you're not living. You're not experiencing what life is, right? You're performing and you're consuming. You're a consumer and you're a performer and you're not a liver, right? And it's like, you want to do that, go for it, but I want no part of it. And there's some pretty good data that it makes people really depressed.
Oh, yeah. It's not good. It's transcended. It's got its goodness, and then it's transcended that to something not good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you can see it in the mental health statistics.
Yes, you can. All right, I just have to read this piece because my note is, what would happen if this was just the accepted idea? And who is this? Koch, Christoph Koch, when he's questioning, so even if you love your wife, you make love to your wife and your bodies are intertwined, you still know this is my leg and this is her leg. But under special circumstances, you can lose these borders and feel you are part of everything. Some people argue that this is evidence of universal consciousness. It's quite possible. I think it's unlikely, but I cannot rule it out on logical grounds. This is he said that.
Koch,
Yeah. And I just think, why, I think it's unlikely, but it's possible. Like, what if that was just what we accepted, this idea that we have already spoken about of this collective consciousness and this availability of information in the field? I just wonder, like, what would change in our lives? Do you have an opinion on that? What would be different?
Okay, I mean, it's important that what we believe be true. And there are things that we already know can't be proven. You can still choose your belief. But what you don't want to say is, I believe that because I'm declaring it true, even though I know I can't prove it to be true. Like, you don't need to do that. You can just say, I live better. I'm a better person. I'm better with others. I experience life more fully if I believe that there's a universal consciousness, right? Which is different than saying, I know for a fact there's one. You don't even need to do that. Right? And, we live as if we're going to live forever in some ways. Like, we're not conscious of mortality all the time because that's crippling. We know that we're not going to, but we're living in emotional reality where we keep that to the side so that we could actually enjoy our children and our this, like, the specter of, like, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die, the shadow of that, like, it can eclipse the sun. You know what I mean? Like, so we do that kind of trick all the time. And so what Christoph Koch is saying, he's the preeminent authority on consciousness, right? Which is this completely vague thing that no one can define. But, he is one of the preeminent authorities on it. And and he's a scientist, and he's, like, being rigorous as a scientist. Like, look, I can't rule it out. I mean, it's a beautiful sentiment. Like, I can't rule it out on logical grounds, right? which doesn't mean it's true. I'm just telling you, I don't have an agenda here. I don't have a preference. I'm not leading the witness. I'm not anything. Like, I can't rule it out, but I also can't prove it. And that to me is like this beauty, the beauty of rationality is that it's like, it's sort of impartiality. Like, it's just like, I don't have a dog in this race, right? Like,
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you, this is actually a question here that I didn't quite understand, so I'm going to ask you. This is like the moment you might die and you know you're going to die. You will know yourself best at that moment. You will be at your most real, your most honest, your most uncalculated. If you could travel back in time to make use of such knowledge during your life, you would become exactly the person you'd always hoped to be. But none of us do that. We don't get that knowledge until it's too late, because then it can't be tainted by vanity or pride or desire.
yeah.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. What are you saying there? Like, you learn at your death that you could have been a wonderful person, but you get that knowledge too late?
So your opinion of yourself is affected by your fears, your ambitions, your biases, your prejudices, like all these things, right? And because you can still affect the outcome, right? You cheat on your wife, you don't tell her about it, you're affecting the outcome. You're that person. Somewhere you know that, but you're not being honest about it because there's an outcome you want to avoid, and whatever. It's all totally understandable human stuff and pretty strongly connected with survival, right? I mean, these are all smart decisions in a lot of ways, right? But at the very end, there is no survival. There's nothing, no more gaming the system, no more placing bets on the table. The game of blackjack's over. Whatever chips you got, those are your chips. No more cards. We're done, right? And then you're really left with who you are, where you are right now, because there is no more, and tomorrow. Who are you, right? And it's the ultimate stripping of vanity and ego. And what reveals is like your true nature, right? And you're not given that knowledge while you're still in the poker game, at the blackjack table, right? You're not given that knowledge because you can't use it. You're going to misuse it. I mean, it's just like you're trying to win the chips, like you know what I mean. And at the very end, when you can no longer use or misuse this knowledge, this one is finally given to you. And it's a perfectly fine arrangement. Like,
so you were given this knowledge, and you're back at the poker table.
Yeah.
So
right. It wasn't the end of my life.
Yeah. So what?
Just a very bad hand.
Just a very bad hand. So you stripped away all of that.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with this next round of poker?
Well, now, but I mean, I found out some things about myself. What emerged out of that was like this just incredible love of my family, for example. And we're tugged in all kinds of directions. Would I love to go to Ukraine? Yeah, of course. It's a very intense war, a lot of intense stuff. But I'm not going to go. But we're tugged by these things, right? Like, you're married. There's a million gorgeous people in the world. Where you're only married to one of them. Tell me that's not a tension in everybody's life. Of course it is, right? If you'd say it's not, then you're not being honest with yourself, right? So we're humans, so we're tugged by all this stuff, right? But then when everything's stripped away, and you're like, wow, there's a big binary going on. I'm either going to live or I'm going to die. And then if you're granted that vision, if you glimpse the gargoyles of your final descent and are allowed to come back, who are you really? What is life really, and what do you want out of it? And so I was given that grace, right? I was given that chance. That's where it turned out to be a blessing, right? A blessing that came at a huge cost, as blessings do. And it made me slightly wiser, slightly calmer. Whatever. It had some good effects. But I'm human. I get overrun with frustration sometimes, and whatever. I'm still a social primate. And I'm a mammal, and I got a complicated brain like everybody does. But I know that place is there. The difference between me now and me before is I know that place is there. I know it's there waiting for me, and I can go back there. Wherever I get myself to, that place of serenity and terror and simplicity and everything and nothing, like that. I can get back there. Like I know it's there to be gotten to, and one day I will wind up there whether I want to or not.
And what if it's also, as that mysterious nurse that we never see again said, what if that is not scary, but that is sacred?
Sacred, yeah, that's right.
And then the fear,
Yeah.
then you don't need to have the fear, because it comes for all of us, and it's a sacred transition.
That's right,
into
absolutely.
something else that we don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for your audience that maybe don't know this, like in the ICU, the nurse who told me that I'd almost died the night before came back an hour later to see how I was doing, and I said, well, frankly, you terrified me. I had no idea I almost died. And she said, try, instead of thinking about it like something scary, think about it like something sacred. A hell of a thing to say to an atheist in the ICU, right? But it was the perfect thing. And you're exactly right. It's like life is sacred, death, that means death is sacred. It's all it's all sacred. And if you can get to that, if you can get out of the fear reaction to the sacred reaction, then you've really crossed over into a really profound place.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. It's a really profound place to stop. This is a really profound book. I hope that everybody reads it. I know I've bought a lot of copies to give to other people. It's so beautiful in so many ways, as are you. Thank you for taking so much time to be with me today. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for taking so much time to read my book and to talk to me. I really enjoyed this.